The hot Egyptian sun beat down on Dr. Hansel Park's back as he carefully brushed sand away from what looked like an ancient doorway. He had been working in the Valley of the Kings for 5 years, but this discovery felt different. The stone door had marks that no one had seen before. "Dr. Park, come look at this," Du Young Kim called out from nearby. Du Young was Hansel's best assistant, always careful with his work. He was pointing at some strange writing on the wall. Hansel walked over, wiping sweat from his forehead. The symbols on the wall were unlike normal Egyptian writing. They seemed to glow slightly in the shadows, but that had to be a trick of the light. "These warnings are different," Jai Li said, joining them. She was their team's expert in ancient languages. Her long black hair was tied back tightly as she leaned in to study the marks. "They talk about a curse, but not like the usual ones we find. This one mentions something about the space between life and death." Hansel took pictures of the symbols with his phone. The Egyptian government would want to see everything before they went inside. But something about these marks made his skin feel cold, even in the desert heat. Their photographer, Ta Wu, set up his cameras to document everything. "The light here is strange," he said, checking his equipment. "My readings keep changing by themselves." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the dig site, the local workers started to pack up their tools quickly. They wouldn't stay near the tomb after dark. Hansel had seen this before, but today even the most experienced workers were leaving. "We should wait until tomorrow," Jai suggested, looking worried. "Something doesn't feel right about this place." But Hansel couldn't wait. This could be the biggest discovery of his career. "We'll just take a quick look inside," he said, setting up bright lights around the doorway. "Du Young, help me with this seal." As they worked to open the ancient door, the air grew colder. The lights flickered, though their batteries were new. Du Young's hands shook as he helped move the final stones. The door opened with a soft hiss, releasing air that had been trapped for thousands of years. The smell of ancient perfumes and spices drifted out, surprisingly fresh after all this time. Hansel's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing walls covered in more of the strange symbols. They seemed to move in the light, but that had to be because of the dust in the air. "Look at this," Du Young whispered, pointing to a small statue near the entrance. It showed a woman wearing a crown Hansel had never seen before. The statue's eyes seemed to follow them as they moved. Jia stepped closer to read the writing near the statue. Her face went pale. "This tomb belongs to Neithotep," she said quietly. "The texts say she was no ordinary priestess. She could talk to the stars." A cold wind blew out of the tomb, making their lights flicker again. In the distance, they heard what sounded like whispers in an ancient language. "We should seal it up," Jia said firmly. "At least until we can bring in more experts." But Hansel knew they couldn't stop now. This tomb could change everything they knew about ancient Egypt. He took a step into the dark doorway, and the whispers grew louder. Behind them, Ta Wu's cameras all stopped working at once. In the silence that followed, they all heard it. A woman's voice, speaking words none of them understood. The curse of the Pharaohs was no longer just an old story. It was becoming very, very real. The next morning, Ta Wu tried to fix his cameras. Nothing seemed broken, but none of them would turn on near the tomb. He walked 50 feet away, and suddenly they all worked perfectly. When he returned to the tomb entrance, they died again. "This isn't normal," he told Dr. Park, showing him how all 5 cameras failed at exactly the same spot. "Even my phone camera gets blurry near the doorway." Hansel frowned at this news. He had seen equipment problems before, but not like this. He wrote everything in his notebook, trying to find a logical explanation. Inside the tomb, Du Young was carefully mapping the first chamber. He placed small markers on the floor to measure the room. But when he turned around, the markers had moved. He put them back, checked his notes, and turned to get more markers from his bag. When he looked again, they had moved to different spots. "Dr. Park," he called out, his voice shaking slightly. Something strange is happening. Jia was studying the walls when she first heard the whispers. They seemed to come from deeper in the tomb, speaking in ancient Egyptian. As an expert in the language, she could almost understand the words, but they faded away whenever she tried to listen closely. "We need to document everything," Hansol said, setting up new lights in the chamber. But the lights cast strange shadows. Sometimes they showed 7 people in the room when only 4 were there. During their lunch break, the team sat outside the tomb. "My photographs from yesterday are gone," Ta Wu said, checking his backup drives. "All of them, even the ones I copied to 3 different places. The artifacts are moving," Du Yum added quietly. "When no one is looking, they change places. I've been marking their positions, but..." He showed them his notebook. The careful measurements he had taken now looked like random scribbles. A group of local workers approached them. Their leader, an old man who had worked on many digs, looked worried. "We cannot stay," he said. "The old powers are waking up. Last night, my daughter saw a woman in ancient clothes walking through our camp. When she tried to speak to her, the woman vanished into the sand." Hansol tried to convince them to stay, but it was no use. By afternoon, all the local workers had left. The team would have to continue alone. As the sun began to set, the strange events got worse. The whispers grew louder. Ga heard clear words now: leave, protect, danger. But when she tried to record them, her recorder only picked up static. Tai Wu set up his last working camera on a tripod and left it running. When they checked the footage, they saw shadows moving by themselves. In one frame, a tall figure in ancient Egyptian clothes stood in the doorway. The next frame showed only darkness. "We should stop," Jia said, showing Hansol more hieroglyphs she had translated. "These warnings talk about guardians who protect the tomb. They say only those chosen by the priestess may enter deeper chambers." But Hansol couldn't stop now. This was the discovery of a lifetime. "We'll be careful," he promised. "Tomorrow, we'll open the second chamber." That night, in their camp, everyone heard the sound of stone grinding against stone. It came from the tomb, as if giant doors were opening and closing by themselves. Du Yum woke up screaming from a nightmare about a woman with golden eyes who spoke to him in ancient Egyptian. The curse was getting stronger, and they had only just begun to uncover its secrets. Ga sat alone in the research tent late that night, studying photographs of the tomb's walls. Everyone else had gone to sleep, but she couldn't rest. Something about the hieroglyphs kept drawing her back. In the dim light of her laptop, she noticed patterns she hadn't seen before. "This can't be right," she muttered, checking her translations again. The symbol spoke of Neithotep, but not as a normal priestess. According to the walls, she had powers that went beyond this world. She could speak to the stars, walk between life and death, and see things that hadn't happened yet. A cold breeze blew through the tent, though the desert night was still. Ga's papers scattered across the floor, and as she picked them up, they rearranged themselves into a new pattern. The hieroglyphs now formed different words. "The chosen ones return." In another tent, Hainul, their youngest team member, was having a strange dream. In it, she stood in a grand temple room she had never seen before. A beautiful woman in royal Egyptian clothes stood before her. The woman's eyes glowed like golden stars. "You have entered my domain," the woman said in perfect Korean, though her lips didn't move. "I am Neithotep, guardian of the gate between worlds." Hanul tried to speak, but no words came out. The woman continued, "Your people were chosen long ago. The signs are in your blood, but great danger awaits if you continue without understanding." The dream shifted, showing Hainul terrible visions. She saw the tomb's deeper chambers filled with strange lights. Ancient powers swirled like storms, and dark shapes moved in the shadows. She saw her team members in danger, lost between the world of the living and the dead. Hanul woke up screaming. Dr. Park and the others rushed to her tent. "The priestess, She gasped, her hands shaking. She spoke to me. She showed me what will happen if we go deeper into the tomb. It was just a dream, Hansel said, trying to calm her. But even he looked worried when Hanuel described parts of the tomb they hadn't opened yet, including details they couldn't have known. GA arrived at the tent, carrying her research papers. She's right, she said, showing them her discoveries. Nephhotep wasn't just any priestess. The hieroglyphs say she had real powers. She made a deal with the gods to protect something important, something hidden in the deepest chamber. There's more, Hanuel said quietly. In my dream, she spoke Korean. She said our people were chosen long ago, that the signs are in our blood. Do Young, who had been quiet until now, suddenly spoke up. The symbols on the wall changed when I looked at them yesterday. They showed me a temple in Korea, one that was built over 2,000 years ago. I thought I was imagining it. Outside, the wind picked up, swirling sand around their camp. In the distance, they heard what sounded like ancient Egyptian music, though there was no one else for miles. We need to research more before we go deeper, Jai-A insisted. These warnings are serious. The hieroglyphs say that unprepared visitors who enter the sacred chamber will be trapped between worlds forever. But as they talked, strange lights began to glow inside the tomb. They pulsed like heartbeats, calling to them. Du Young stood up as if in a trance, walking toward the tomb entrance. The priestess wants to show us something, he said in a voice that didn't sound quite like his own. She says time is running out. The balance is breaking. The teen watched as the lights grew brighter, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. The curse of the Pharaohs wasn't just about death and punishment. It was about something much bigger, something that connected their past to an ancient power they were only beginning to understand. Strange things began happening more often at the dig site. That morning, the team woke up to find their camp surrounded by a sandstorm. The weird thing was, it only affected their camp, 10 feet away. The air was completely clear. This isn't natural, Ta Wu said, trying to photograph the strange storm. The sand moved in perfect circles around their tents, as if something was controlling it. Dr. Park was having his own problems. When he woke up that morning, he found strange Egyptian symbols on his arms. They looked like they had been painted with gold ink, but he couldn't wash them off. By noon, they had faded away on their own. The same thing happened to me, Du Young told him, rolling up his sleeve to show similar marks on his shoulder. But his symbols were different, and they glowed slightly in the shadows. Inside the tomb, Du Young spent hours staring at one particular wall. The hieroglyphs seemed to speak to him now. Sometimes they changed when he looked at them, showing him ancient secrets. He forgot to eat or drink, lost in the ancient words. Du Young, you need to rest, Jai-A said, trying to pull him away from the wall. But he just shook his head. Can't you see what they're showing us? He asked, his eyes looking strange and distant. The symbols. They're telling us about a gateway. Something hidden deep below. That afternoon, they found new chambers they hadn't seen before. Doorways appeared in walls that had been solid stone the day before. Hansel tried to make a map, but the tomb seemed to change its layout every few hours. Look at this, Hanuel called out. She had found a small room filled with ancient mirrors. Each mirror showed something different. Places in Korea, ancient Egyptian temples, and strange spaces that didn't look like they were from Earth at all. GA studied the mirrors carefully. These aren't normal reflections, she said. According to the hieroglyphs, Nephhotep used these to watch other worlds. They're like windows between different places and times. As she spoke, one mirror showed them their own camp, but it looked different. The image showed events that hadn't happened yet, their tents torn apart by supernatural winds, dark shapes moving in the night. Suddenly, all their equipment started working at once. Every camera, phone, and light turned on by itself. They all showed the same thing. Recordings of ancient Egyptian ceremonies that had happened thousands of years ago in that very room. The tomb is trying to tell us something, Du Young said, his voice sounding older and wiser than usual. The symbols on his shoulder were glowing brighter now. Nephhotep left these messages for people like us, people with the old blood. That night, the sandstorm got worse. Dark shapes moved through the swirling sand, some looking like ancient Egyptian people, others like creatures from another world. The team huddled in the main tent, watching as their equipment recorded impossible things. Dr. Park tried to make sense of it all in his notebook, but the golden symbols kept appearing on his skin, spreading up his arms and across his chest. Each new mark burned slightly, like it was being carved into his flesh by invisible hands. "We need to understand what's happening to us," Jai said, watching the symbols fade and reappear on Hansol's skin. "The curse isn't just affecting the tomb. It's changing us too." Outside, the storm howled with voices that spoke in both ancient Egyptian and Old Korean. The tomb was calling to them, pulling them deeper into its mysteries. And in the deepest chamber, something powerful was waiting, something that had chosen them long before they ever came to Egypt. Ga couldn't sleep. She sat in the research tent, spreading out old photographs of Korean museums. As she looked through them, she noticed something that made her heart beat faster. Every team member had a connection to ancient Egyptian artifacts, but they hadn't realized it until now. "Dr. Park," she called out, even though it was the middle of the night. "You need to see this." Hansol came quickly, followed by the others. They gathered around as Ga laid out the photos. "Look," she said, pointing to an old picture of Hansol as a child. He was standing next to an Egyptian statue in a Korean museum. The statue showed the same priestess they had found in the tomb. "This isn't a coincidence." She showed them more photos. Du Young had written his college paper about an Egyptian amulet found in his hometown. Tagu's first photography job was taking pictures of Egyptian artifacts. Even Gia herself had grown up near a temple that kept an ancient Egyptian scroll. "We weren't chosen by chance," she explained, her hands shaking with excitement. "Something has been preparing us for this our whole lives." Hamnul, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke up. "My grandmother," she said softly. "She told me a story before she died. I thought it was just a fairy tale." Everyone turned to listen as Hamnul told her story. Years ago, her grandmother had found an Egyptian amulet in her family's temple. Strange things started happening. Lights in the night, voices speaking ancient languages, shadows that moved on their own. "The amulet was cursed," Hamnul continued, "but my grandmother didn't destroy it. She took it back to Egypt herself. She said she followed dreams that showed her where to go." "What happened then?" Tawu asked, taking pictures of the old photos Ga had found. "She found an old temple in Egypt. The priests there had been waiting for her. They said the amulet was part of something bigger, a connection between our lands that went back thousands of years." As Hamnul spoke, the lights in the tent flickered. Outside, the wind carried whispers in ancient Egyptian and Old Korean at the same time. "After she returned the amulet, the curse on our family was broken," Hamnul said. "But she told me we would be called again someday, that there were more secrets to uncover." Do Young's eyes went wide. The symbols on his shoulder were glowing again. "The hieroglyphs," he said. "They keep showing me images of ancient Korean temples. I thought I was going crazy, but now it makes sense." Jia pulled out more research papers. "Look at these dates," she said. "The time when Egyptian artifacts first appeared in Korea matches exactly with the time period of Nephhotep's rule. She sent them there on purpose." The team looked at each other as they realized what this meant. They weren't just random archaeologists who had found a tomb. They were part of something much older and bigger. "My grandmother's last words to me," Hamnul said quietly, "were about a prophecy. She said when the chosen ones returned to Egypt, the gateway would open again." Suddenly, all the lights went out. In the darkness, they saw golden symbols appearing on their skin. The same marks that had been showing up on Dr. Park, but now they could read them. The marks told an ancient story about guardians chosen to protect something powerful, something hidden between worlds. "We need to go back into the tomb," Du Young said, his voice mixing with other, older voices. "Neithhotep isn't trying to hurt us. She's been waiting for us. We're the ones she chose to protect her secret." The wind outside grew stronger, and in the distance, they heard the sound of ancient drums. The curse of the Pharaohs wasn't a curse at all. It was a call across time, waiting for the right people to answer. The change in Du Young happened very quickly. One moment he was reading the hieroglyphs on the wall, and the next moment his eyes turned golden. When he spoke, his voice was different, deeper and older, with perfect ancient Egyptian. "Du Young," Dr. Park asked carefully, moving closer to his friend. But Du Young didn't seem to hear him. "The time of waiting is over," Du Young said, but it wasn't really him speaking. His voice echoed strangely in the tomb, and golden light shimmered around him. "I am Neithhotep, keeper of the gateway." Jaiye stepped forward. She understood ancient Egyptian, but Du Young was speaking it better than any modern person could. He used words that had been lost for thousands of years. "Why have you taken Du Young?" she asked in careful Egyptian. Du Young, or Neithhotep through him, turned to look at her. He opened his mind to the ancient words. His spirit was most ready to receive mine. "Through him, I can speak to you directly." Taiwu's cameras were working now, capturing everything. The golden light around Du Young showed up clearly in the pictures, along with strange shapes moving in the air around him. "Listen carefully," Neithhotep said through Du Young. "Deep below this tomb lies an artifact of great power. It keeps the balance between the world of the living and the world of the dead." Hanul remembered her grandmother's stories about doors between worlds. "Is that what you've been protecting all these years?" she asked. "Yes," Du Young/Neithhotep answered. "For 5,000 years, I have guarded the gateway. But now the seals are wearing thin. The balance is breaking. That is why I called you here." Through Du Young's eyes, Neithhotep showed them visions of the past. They saw ancient Egypt when it was new, and they saw Neithhotep discovering the gateway. They watched as she built the tomb to hide it, creating magic seals to protect it. "But why us?" Dr. Park asked, the golden symbols on his skin glowing brighter. "Why did you choose our team?" "Your bloodlines were chosen long ago," Neithhotep explained. "When I saw the darkness coming, I sent artifacts to your land. They marked certain families who would have the power to help when the time came." Du Young's body started to shake. Sweat ran down his face as he fought to handle the ancient spirit's power. "The gateway," he gasped in his own voice before Neithhotep took control again. "It's pulling at me." "We must hurry," Neithhotep said. "The seal is breaking faster now. Soon, the doors between life and death will open too wide. The dead will walk among the living. The balance will be destroyed." Suddenly, Du Young collapsed. Dr. Park and Taiwu caught him before he hit the ground. The golden light faded, but the air still felt heavy with ancient power. When Du Young opened his eyes again, they were normal, but he looked tired and scared. "I saw everything," he whispered. "I saw what's below us. The gateway. It's beautiful and terrible at the same time." "What do we need to do?" J.A. asked, helping Du Young sit up. "We have to go deeper into the tomb," he said. "Neithhotep showed me the way. But we don't have much time. The old seals are failing. And," he paused, looking afraid, "we're not the only ones who know about the gateway. Something dark is coming. Something that wants to break the seals completely." The team looked at each other. They had come to Egypt looking for archaeological treasures. Instead, they had found an ancient power that needed their help. The curse that had brought them here wasn't meant to scare them away. It was meant to prepare them for what they had to do next. The team stood at the entrance to the deepest chamber. Ancient power rolled out like waves of heat, making the air shimmer. They had to make a choice, but it wasn't an easy one. "If we go forward," Dr. Park said, looking at his team, "we might make the biggest discovery in archaeological history. But after what we've seen, He touched the golden symbols that still glowed on his skin. Or we could seal it all up, Ta Wu suggested, checking his camera. For the first time in days, it was working perfectly, capturing strange lights that danced in the air. Leave the gateway alone, like it's been for thousands of years. Do Young was still weak from being possessed, but his eyes were clear now. Neithotep showed me what will happen if we leave, he said quietly. The old seals are breaking. If we don't help fix them, the gateway will open by itself. As if to prove his point, a deep rumble came from below. The whole tomb shook, and new cracks appeared in the walls. Through the cracks, they could see flashes of another world, a place of shadows and ancient spirits. Something's already coming through, Jai said, translating quickly as new hieroglyphs appeared on the walls by themselves. The barrier between worlds is getting weaker. Hanul stepped closer to the doorway. The air felt different there, like the moment before a storm. My grandmother's stories, she said, they weren't just about returning artifacts. They were about this moment. She knew we would have to make this choice. Strange shapes moved in the shadows. They looked like people, but not quite. Too tall, too fluid, like they were made of darkness. Ancient Egyptian music echoed through the tomb, mixing with Korean drums that seemed to come from far away. Look, Ta Wu pointed to his camera screen. The images showed things they couldn't see with their eyes, spirits gathering around them, some looking like Egyptian gods, others like Korean ancestors. They were all watching, waiting to see what the team would do. Dr. Park tried to think like a scientist, but science couldn't explain what was happening. The symbols on his skin burned brighter, showing him visions of what might happen. He saw the gateway opening too wide, saw the barriers between life and death breaking down all over the world. We have to go in, Du Young said suddenly, standing up straighter. But not for archaeology, not for fame. We have to do what Neithotep chose us for. We have to fix the seals. A cold wind blew through the tomb, carrying whispers in ancient languages. The dark shapes in the shadows moved closer. Through the cracks in the walls, they could see more of the other world, a place where the dead walked and ancient powers were still strong. If we do this, Jai said, reading more of the new hieroglyphs, we'll have to give up the discovery. No one can know what's really down there. The gateway has to stay secret. More rumbles came from below. The gateway was pulling at them now, like a giant magnet. The shadows reached for them with hands made of darkness. Time was running out. Choose, whispered voices in both Egyptian and Korean. Choose now. Hanul stepped forward, touching the doorway. Ancient powers sparked under her fingers. We're not here by accident, she said. Our families have been keeping these secrets for thousands of years. We can't walk away now. Dr. Park looked at his team. They were no longer just archaeologists. They were the chosen guardians of something ancient and powerful. Everything they had learned, everything they had experienced, had led them to this moment. Together, he asked. One by one, they nodded. The choice was made. As they stepped toward the final chamber, the air grew thick with power. The gateway was waiting for them, and beyond it lay secrets older than history itself. In the deepest chamber of the tomb, the team finally saw the gateway. It looked like a tall doorway made of light and shadow, spinning slowly in the air. Ancient Egyptian symbols and Korean characters floated around it, glowing with golden fire. It's beautiful, Hanul whispered. She remembered her grandmother's words about doors between worlds, and now she understood them perfectly. The gateway was breaking. They could see cracks in the air around it, like broken glass. Through these cracks, dark shapes tried to push through into their world. The ancient seals that Neithotep had made were failing. We have to fix it now, Du Young said. Though he was no longer possessed, he could still feel Neithotep's presence. She's showing me how. Ji quickly translated the symbols floating in the air. It needs both powers, she said, Egyptian and Korean. That's why Neithotep connected our people so long ago. One side alone isn't strong enough. Dr. Park's golden symbols were glowing brighter than ever. What do we do? Hanul stepped forward. My grandmother taught me old Korean prayers, she said. They're like the ones on the gateway. The dark shapes pressed closer, trying harder to break through. The air felt heavy and cold. Strange voices whispered from the other side of the gateway, trying to tempt them to open it wider. Everyone, join hands, Hanul said. Form a circle around the gateway. As they joined hands, something amazing happened. The golden symbols on their skin began to move, flowing like water between them. Korean characters mixed with Egyptian hieroglyphs, creating new patterns of power. Hanul started singing an ancient Korean prayer. Du Young, still connected to Neithotep's spirit, began chanting in ancient Egyptian. The two sounds wove together perfectly, creating music that made the air shine. Tawu's camera captured incredible images, spirits of ancient Egyptian priests and Korean shamans appearing around them, joining their circle, adding their power to the ritual. The gateway responded. The cracks in the air started to heal. The dark shapes were pushed back. Golden light filled the chamber, warm and bright. Look, G.A. pointed to the walls. New hieroglyphs were appearing, but these were different. They mixed Egyptian and Korean symbols together, creating a new kind of seal. Dr. Park felt power flowing through him, through all of them. Their circle glowed brighter and brighter. The gateway began to stabilize, its spinning slowing down, the tears between worlds healing. Then Hanul spoke in a voice that mixed her own with her grandmother's wisdom. The gateway doesn't need to be sealed completely. It needs to be balanced. She was right. As their combined powers worked, they could see what Neithotep had created, not a locked door, but a carefully balanced bridge between worlds. Just enough to keep the ancient powers alive, but not enough to let them break free. The dark shapes faded away. The gateway's light turned soft and steady. New seals, made from both Egyptian and Korean magic, settled into place. When it was done, they stood in peaceful silence. The gateway was calm now, protected by their combined heritage. Through it, they could faintly see Neithotep smiling at them. What do we tell the world? Tawu asked, looking at his camera. All his photos of the gateway had vanished, leaving only normal pictures of an ancient tomb. The truth, Dr. Park said, but not all of it. We'll report finding a tomb with unusual Korean connections. That's important enough for archaeology. The rest stays with us, Hanul finished, like it stayed with our families for thousands of years. They carefully packed up their equipment, hiding the way to the gateway chamber. As they worked, their golden symbols faded slowly, but they could still feel the power inside them. They were part of something ancient now, guardians of a secret that connected two worlds. Outside, the curse that had scared away their workers was gone, but in its place was something better, a blessing of protection, woven from Egyptian and Korean magic, guarding the gateway until it would need them again.